This particular example is an almost new Cosworth Vega. As I'm driving it right now, I've got 178 miles on it. You're watching this video, so the chances are great that you enjoy what we create here at the Audrain. And if you do, why not take the next step and subscribe to this channel? You might also consider a membership in the Audrain Automobile Museum. We mount 4 new exhibitions each year featuring cars from the Audrain collections and loans from some of the leading collectors and institutions around the world. Click here to find out more. The car I'm driving right now came in second in a road test comparison that included the Alfa Romeo Alfetta, Mazda Cosmo, Saab EMS, and yet very few people can tell you anything about this car today. This is a 1976 Chevrolet Vega Cosworth. Actually, well, a Cosworth Vega, to give credit where credit is due. It's difficult to remember that the Vega was a part of the great sort of third Detroit fights the imports period, when the Ford Pinto and the Chevy Vega were introduced to halt the onslaught of Honda and Toyota here in the US in the mid-1970s. And the Vega was a really interesting project. Very advanced in terms of the design, the engineering that was built into the car, the platform. Again, a very European type platform. The idea was lightweight materials, innovative forms of development in the engine, all aluminum engine. And John DeLorean, who was the Senior VP of Engineering and Development at GM at the time, decided that they needed to look for a really high performance solution for this new car to really take advantage of the chassis design and the lightness of the car. And so GM went to Cosworth, the great race car builders in the UK, to work on the Vega engine to give it more power. They developed an engine that in race trim is used in some racing cars in the UK, developed 260 horsepower. That was rather a bit much for what GM needed for their street project. And so by the time the engine was fully developed for the street, it was still a 110 horsepower version, which is actually 60 pounds lighter than the standard Vega engine. And so really helped with power to weight ratio and balance in the car. And the result was this limited production Cosworth Vega. I remember when these cars first came out, I thought they were incredibly sexy in that very typically classic, simple, mid-70s European way. I thought, wow, yeah, this is what Americans should be manufacturing. And the whole thing went pear-shaped fairly quickly. The engines were not terribly reliable, although they had been tested to great extent by GM. I think that the figure I remember reading was that GM standard was that an engine should be able to operate at maximum capacity for 200 hours, and these were tested to 500 hours. But maybe they just weren't the 500 hours that the customers who bought them got. And so they only made these cars for 2 years, 75 and 76. And at that point, the bloom was off the rose with the Vega in general, because there were so many problems with the standard engine, and they also had an incredible propensity to rust. So the experiment was sort of over, and the Vega was left to slink off into the shadows. Now, one of the things that you may have noticed so far as you're watching this video is that I keep adjusting this shoulder belt. Even by the mid-1970s, a lot of American manufacturers still hadn't gotten the whole seat and shoulder belt thing quite right. And this is a single piece shoulder and lap belt harness which cuts across your neck in a really annoying way because they hadn't yet done the adjustable height for the shoulder harness, but I digress. This is a really terrific car to drive. This particular example is an almost new Cosworth Vega. As I'm driving it right now, I've got 178 miles on it. And as was the case with many cars, even today, someone bought this car and said, wow, this is really special, and I'm going to stock it away and save it for the future when it's going to be worth a fortune. Well, they stocked it away and saved it for the future. And when it was sold at auction, it did bring a very good price, but hardly the fortune I think that the person who bought this and put it away quite imagined. And there's a certain danger in buying and using a car that has basically never been driven. The Audrain team in our maintenance works, led by our great head mechanic Lee Castleberry, has been working on this car for quite a while to make it usable and reliable the way we insist that all of our cars be. And I have to say that I attempted to drive this a year ago for a YouTube shoot, and things did not go well. However, Lee and his team have done a wonderful job in bringing this car back to rude health, and I can fully enjoy, and enjoy is the word, the capabilities of this chassis. The engine is incredibly responsive. The car is very light. It's very interesting in comparing this with a contemporary 911, and that may seem a silly comparison, but it's actually quite apt. 911 put out 150 horsepower in 75, and this 110 horsepower car feels as alive and responsive as a Porsche. And it is a shame that this project went the way it did, because I think this really pointed to a really interesting form of transport in the U.S., and something which I think is very much the equal of the European and Japanese offerings of the time. It loves to rev. And the sweet spot is really right here, about 5,000 RPM. It makes a wonderful sound as well. It's not a sound that you would often associate with a Chevrolet. And this car also suffered from the fact that it was frighteningly expensive. It was just slightly less expensive than a Corvette. And yeah, it had the great performance, but were you really going to explain to your friends that, yeah, I got Corvette performance, but it's a Vega? The build quality is good. It's frankly not as good as that of the Pinto, but I think it's mostly down to the materials. This is a time when materials were not at their greatest in Detroit cars, but there is a certain design integrity that this car has, which is very, very fulfilling. The engine turning detail on the dashboard, sort of like the ubiquitous carbon fiber look that we see in today's interiors, give us a real race car feel. And it's also numbered. This is number 2267 of the Cosworth Vega's built. And again, they gave you that exclusivity that you really want in a sporting car. There are very few examples that still exist of this car that are in the kind of condition that this one is. It's something that definitely should be experienced. Cosworth Vega also has a wonderful feel of a 1970s high-performance car. A dogleg 5-speed gearbox, something that you wouldn't expect in an American car, but again, very Porsche 911-like. And just an eagerness to go on the throttle. It wants you to rev. It's not one of those super torquey, big American engines that just sort of lazily pulls around. You need to be involved in the driving of this car. And I think that's really what Cosworth and Chevy and DeLorean were all about and after. And there are very, very few Cosworth Vegas that survived in anywhere near the condition of this car is. But I think that if you could find one, they're worth searching out. And not to mention the fact that to bring you to do that total 70s experience, the black and the gold, you feel like Mario Andretti in a John Player Special Lotus. Cosworth makes the Vega worth a second look.